Hello everyone, my name is Josh Glover and today I'm going to be discussing about William McKinley and the Front Porch Campaign. What I'm going to be aiming for this multimedia presentation is to look at William McKinley and his utilization of the Front Porch Campaign for his election into the presidency in 1896 and 1900. What I'm going to be talking about is specifically looking at the Front Porch Campaign and how effective it was to leading the McKinley's presidency as the 25th president of the United States. So from here, I'm going to discuss kind of briefly about William McKinley's early life. So William McKinley was born on January 29th, 1843 in Niles, Ohio. After he grew up, he started, he enlisted into the Union Army and actually became a major in the United States Union Army during the Civil War. After the Civil War ended, he actually moved down to Canton, Ohio, which is where we're going to be focusing on his Front Porch Campaign, where he eventually lived out the rest of his life. But after the Civil War, he actually became an attorney and a lawyer in Canton, Ohio. He actually, one thing that's interesting to note is that he eventually met his future wife, Ida Saxton, there, which she was actually had many traces to the creation of Canton, Ohio. One of her ancestors was actually one of the very first settlers in Canton, and her family actually came from a wealthy line of bankers throughout the Canton community. And in fact, her parents were actually the second wealthiest people in Canton, Ohio. So when William McKinley actually married Ida Saxton, it's actually how he became more of a household name besides his background as an attorney and lawyer of the community. From there, he actually became heavily involved in politics, and from there he eventually became elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, which he served from 1877 to 1891. From there, his fame actually continued to grow throughout the small community of Canton, Ohio, and eventually across the state, which eventually allowed him to become the 39th governor of Ohio, which he served from 1892 to 1896. So one thing that's interesting to note is that even though he eventually served as the governor until 1896, up until that point throughout the 1890s, the American civilians actually had political and even economical instabilities. One of the things that actually was happening is that there was an economic depression that started in 1893, which is often referred to as the Panic of 1893. Industries they've believed were actually like ruined because industries were unable to protect the wages of the workers and even like their wages and even their like protections of like the industries. So one thing that the 1896 presidential election was coming approaching is that McKinley actually saw the bid and actually believed that his campaigning and his ideals were actually could apply to the United States and actually bring him out of this economic depression. So one thing that he actually believed in, as we could see here in this bottom corner for his bit of presidency in 1896, he believed in industrial stability. He actually believed that protectionism of American jobs from foreign investments and actually foreign workers. He actually compared to his eventual running mate in the Democratic Party of William Jennings Bryan, who favored the silver standard. William McKinley believed that the gold standard was actually the remedy for the American people. He believed that it actually could stable the monetary policy and monetary system of the United States. But one other thing that actually sets William McKinley above William Jennings Bryan and ahead of everybody else in his Republican nominee for president in 1896 is that he had political experience as a lawyer, as a House of Representative member, and the governor of Ohio. But on top of that, he actually had traces and backing by other politicians and business leaders, such as one entrepreneur from Cleveland, an eventually close friend that actually funded his campaign in both 1896 and 1900, wealthy entrepreneur Mark Hanna. So one thing that's interesting to note is where this Front Porch Campaign came in, and this is where William McKinley actually allowed him the seat into the presidency in 1896, and he used it again for his second term in 1900. So one thing that it was interesting to know is that the Front Porch Campaign was fairly new, but it wasn't brand new in 1896. Other candidates such as Rutherford B. Hayes and actually James A. Garfield, who eventually became presidents throughout the 1870s and 1880s. And fun fact, they were actually both from Ohio, actually heavily utilized the Front Porch Campaign. So one thing that's interesting to note about the Front Porch Campaign is that William McKinley took it on a whole different level compared to Rutherford B. Hayes and James Garfield. He actually believed that because of his backing by many rich entrepreneurs and politicians like Mark Hanna, they could actually effectively fund his campaign from his porch. In fact, one thing that set William McKinley apart from his adversary in William Jennings Bryan, who actually traveled throughout the United States to get voters to vote for him, is that he actually believed that by conducting these front porch campaigns, people will actually want to come over to travel and actually see him. So there's also many other reasons why William McKinley ran the Front Porch Campaign, many of it personal issues because of his wife's ill health at the time, but he also believed that he could actually turn it around to his advantage. Because he was able to run the Front Porch Campaign from his front porch and allowing people from all over the nation to actually come and listen to his speeches, he could actually become a symbol of pertaining to the people. He actually was able to communicate face to face with the people who actually wanted to come in here instead of having people to travel to have to listen to him. And on top of that, one thing that's interesting to note is that William McKinley, as you can see down here, this is a photo from him on his front porch giving a speech, is that he believed that the people should be able to listen to him, and that he was able from his words convey to people what he actually meant. And it actually kind of tied to the sympathies of the people. And on top of that, when he practiced the Front Porch Campaign from his house, he believed that he could be able to maintain his campaign much more stably than if he was to travel across the nation. So one thing that's interesting to note here is, beside the picture of him on the front porch, is that this is an actual 1896 presidential campaign ribbon of William McKinley. The interesting thing to note is that this right here is actually not taking a picture from a museum. This is actually one that I own. And on the back of it, I don't have a picture of it right now, is actually from 1896. So it's actually from his first bid for president. On top of that, here are some pictures I actually took from the McKinley Museum and stuff. So like right here on the left is actually one of the donating things from the Saxton family of one of the hats that he wore during his presidential campaign on his front porch. On the right here is actually one of the front porch furnitures that he was on his porch during his front porch campaign. And although you can't really see it down below here, is actually a picture of him sitting on the chair. On this next slide is actually a further exhibit of this. So you can actually see here, and actually right back here is actually pictures taken after he was done with his speeches from some of the audience members that would listen to his speeches. And on top of that, the one thing that's very interesting to note here, and it's kind of ironic, is one of the museum goers told me, is that William McKinley, it is not intentionally here, is situated right back here. However, it's kind of interesting to know is that whether you move from the left or to the right, it almost seems like he's staring at you. So it's kind of ironic that they didn't intentionally have that happen, but it just came out. So it's almost like he's staring at you. So one thing that eventually allowed William McKinley is that the Front Porch Campaign allowed many voters to actually sympathize with McKinley because he was actually pertaining to the people, and eventually it allowed him to win the presidency in 1896, and eventually his succession into the second term in 1900, which he effectively used the Front Porch Campaign once again. However, after his election into his second term in 1900, he didn't actually get a chance to serve a full year before he was assassinated while attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. He eventually succumbed to his wounds a week later on September 14th, 1901, and eventually was succeeded by his vice presidential pick in Theodore Roosevelt. And eventually, after McKinley's death, the people of Canton, Ohio, which he had lived majority of his life, actually mourned for his loss. And quickly after his loss, his body was transferred from Washington, D.C. to the city of Canton. And actually, throughout the whole community, they believed that a memorial should be immediately dedicated to for his endeavors, not only through the Front Porch Campaign, but to the state and eventually to the nation as a whole. So one thing that's interesting to note is that quickly in Arlington, this one cemetery just down the street from the McKinley Monument is actually this tomb right here. And although you can't really see it right here from where I am, I took this picture, and this one off to the left is that this served as a mausoleum for William McKinley from his death in 1901 until 1907, where eventually his body and eventually his wife and his other daughters who died in their infancy were moved to the current monument. So actually, you could see here, although it's kind of run down, there's actually some renovation starting to be going to be proceeding here soon in the weeks to come. But right now, they're actually starting to work on the mausoleum and its restoration. So eventually, as these pictures I have taken here is where his body was moved to, and it's actually a big memorial park and whatnot. So there's like the museum is off to the left, and you have to climb these big stairs to actually go up to the monument where his body lays to this day. It's actually considered one of the biggest mausoleums of any U.S. presidents in the United States, and there's a total of there's actually many stairs that go up to it. The interesting note is that if you were to look at this thing from aerial view, the mausoleum represents the bottom of a sword, and then eventually right through here in this lawn used to be water, which they have taken out. But however, this whole grounds actually represents a sword, which I'm not exactly sure why, but I don't know if it was intentional or not. But some people are, even historians in the museum, are speculating what it really meant. I want to thank the McKinley Museum for helping me out with this research for this presentation. One thing that's interesting to know for this conclusion is how effective the Front Porch Campaign was. Today, many candidates for the presidency continue to follow the Front Porch Campaign's ideas because they believe that it teaches them face-to-face with the people they are trying to rally and vote. And today it is still being effectively followed. Thank you.